So, in the world of Cyberpunk 2077, we see that Night City is in a decentish state, other than the average citizen fighting for their life constantly and people getting murdered and killed and kidnapped. But overall, compared to the rest of the world and what's happened up to this point, it's in a pretty decent spot. But how did the world get to this point? This made me curious, so I decided to delve deep into the past of the United States in the cyberpunk world, going all the way back to the 1950s at where it started. From the 1950s to the 1990s, there was a Gang of Four. This was actually just a political powerhouse comprised of the NSA, CIA, FBI, and DEA. Originating in this 1950s era, the Gang of Four played a major role in the Cold War, with the Soviet Union monitoring nearly every line of communication both domestically and overseas. Eventually, they amassed so much power they became a form of shadow government, acting independently from Washington, D.C. and coordinating outside of legal bounds. This leads us into the Quiet War, going from 1990 to 1994. Firstly, starting at the end of 1989, the Soviet Union collapsed, ending the decades-long Cold War, and subsequently a rift developed between the U.S. and European nations. At this time, Europe had formed the EEC, or European Economic Community. The EEC's political power was rising steadily and was looking to overtake their American allies, and would soon express distaste for the United States' overreaching foreign policy. In 1992, the EEC would go against the wishes of the US and send humanitarian and economic aid to the now failing Soviet states. They would follow up with getting the USSR to accept the Eurodollar over the American dollar and withdraw from NATO, seeing as the relationship was stronger with the Soviet Union. The Gang of Four would retaliate during the EEC's developing space exploration and would manipulate the stock markets in Europe and Asia, artificially altering values to slow their ever-expanding influence. At the same time as the EEC and USSR's diplomatic relations, the Gang of Four was also attempting to curb the crack cocaine epidemic happening domestically. The Gang of Four released an artificial virus in Central and South America that destroyed vast amounts of coca and opium crops, and even funded paramilitary groups to aid in weakening the South American drug lords, all in an attempt to take out the drug supply chain at its source. These nations became destabilized, succumbing to infighting and cartel insurgencies. The fighting would spill over borders to neighboring countries and lead to a full-scale invasion known as the First Central American War. The U.S. sent in military support, but was countered by the EEC sending aid to cartels, dragging the war on over several years, as well as the eventual catastrophe of a nuclear weapon detonating in the heart of New York City, which was detonated by the cartels that the Gang of Four had gone and tried to take down. While the Central American conflict continued, the EEC became aware of the Gang of Four's influence over the global stock markets and leaked sensitive information to global news outlets in retaliation. The markets quickly collapsed, and nations all over the world would impose embargoes on the U.S., leading to federal bonds being sold at rates never seen before, causing the government to print more money and in turn devaluing the currency and causing massive inflation, leading to the collapse. The collapse spans from 1994 to 2004, where the U.S. economy spiraled out of control. The U.S. president as well as vice president were assassinated. Secretary of Defense Jonathan Seward would assume mantle of president, with the Speaker of the House undergoing a surgical procedure, and pro tempore of the Senate was unwilling to take on the responsibility. Seward would immediately declare martial law in order to try and quell the unrest erupting nationwide due to American citizens now having nothing to their names with the crash of the markets and devaluation of the U.S. currency. The Gang of Four would attempt to sponsor coalitions in the Senate, but were stricken out by a newly formed administration. This new administration would attempt to lift the trade embargoes, but would not succeed until around 1998. It was also during this time that military intelligence began to notice some aberrant activities from various government agencies operating in tandem. Most notably, the large number of black ops being carried out with no government oversight. With the Gang of Four fearing their true motives coming to light, they tried to interfere with the military's intelligence. By 1997, the NSA withheld massive amounts of information obtained by American military and Israeli sources during the Mideast meltdown, a limited nuclear exchange between Iran and Iraq. The NSA would obscure satellite imagery, extracted all of their agents in secret, knowing that a nuclear war was imminent. This resulted in roughly 300 NSA agents being extracted, but leaving the U.S. military to deal with the losses. The Arabian Peninsula was razed, leaving the world oil supply to diminish and cripple the United States. The military grew suspicious of the Gang of Four, began opening inquiries of personnel files in the Department of Defense. The military discovered alarming evidence that the Gang of Four had conspired as an independent entity for an extended period of time and immediately ordered the dissolution of the FBI and DEA. Later, acting President Seward was assassinated by an NSA agent disguised as an irate nomad. He would be replaced by General William Newell, who would shortly after get involved in a CIA-instigated Second Central American War, aiming to contain the unrest in South America, spreading the military thin, thus allowing the NSA and CIA to continue operating independently up until 2004. From 2004 to 2008, acting President Newell would take advantage of his connection to the Special Operations Command, a division of the U.S. Armed Forces and core component of the CIA, promising full immunity for any testimony concerning the inner dealings of the Gang of Four. From these testimonies, the U.S. government learned that the inner circle of the NSA was responsible for the assassinations of high-level officials, including the late President Seward. President Newell would then have the CIA restructured and reincorporated into the new government. The military then purged the NSA by force in March of 2004. It was then believed to be the end of the corruption of the Gang of Four, but the NSA had a show of power when they assassinated Tesla Johannesson, a World News Service star in Cairo, Egypt. Another 4 years of covert fighting around the world ensued between the NSA and U.S. government, but eventually would be stomped out. The last remnants of the NSA were found hiding in Washington, D.C., and were crushed with an overwhelming military response. The members of the inner circle of the NSA, however, were never found and are believed to have fled to various corporations. Martial law was lifted afterwards in November of 2008, but the damage was too great and the U.S. was in shambles, leading to several states seceding and a total death toll across the country topping out in the hundreds of millions. One of these seceded areas would be a section of California that is now Night City, founded by Richard Knight, which I will cover in another video. But I thought this was pretty interesting, and seeing how the shadow government, or these government agencies acting of their own volition, really led to the collapse of pretty much the whole world, and that's kind of where we're headed. And seeing as we're heading into Phantom Liberty as a DLC, and we're going to deal with the NUSA, which their goal, as far as I know, is to try and get Night City back into the United States, but we might see some action from the Gang of Four, specifically the NSA branch, and they may be trying to mess with the NUSA during all this. And of course, mega corporations have an interest to not rejoin the government of the United States as well. Anyway, I hope you found this as interesting as I did. The lore of Cyberpunk can be sort of complicated, and there's also a lot of areas where we just have to assume certain things, but I thought this was a pretty good lead up to how we got to where we're at now. Obviously, this would be ending right before the era of Johnny Silverhand nuking Arasaka Tower, but we'll cover that more in the next video with Richard Knight. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a like and a comment down below. Let me know if there's anything you want me to cover specifically in Cyberpunk lore, and I will do my best. I know I've had a few comments talking about Cyberpunk Red, which is the tabletop game, and going over some of that. So if anyone's interested, I can make some videos talking about the tabletop game and how that would operate. And if anyone ever wants to, maybe start a small group, maybe even just do a couple sessions, just let me know. I'm easiest to reach on Twitter or Discord. There should be links on my channel, and I'll put them in the description below. And with that, I am going to Delta out of here. Thanks so much for watching, Chooms. Peace out.